Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into something absolutely brutal. A world where empires fall not to armies, but to a mother's broken heart. We're diving into how Queen Tomyris turned history's greatest conqueror into her personal drinking cup. Forget everything you think you know about ancient warfare. This is revenge, served ice cold across the steppes of Central Asia. The truth? Most of you wouldn't survive the political games that destroyed the Persian Empire. So before we witness this epic takedown together, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're ready for the raw truth about maternal fury, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. It's incredible to see who's brave enough to explore these dark chapters of history with me. Now dim those lights, maybe grab something warm to drink, though you might rethink that cup after tonight's story. Picture the endless grasslands where civilizations go to die, and let's dive into this tale together. The story of how one mother's revenge became an empire's worst nightmare. You've just woken up as the most powerful human being who has ever lived. Your name is Cyrus the Great, and the year is 530 BC. You're lying in a golden bed in a palace that makes modern mansions look like garden sheds, surrounded by wealth that would make Jeff Bezos weep with envy. You control an empire that stretches from India to Greece, from the steppes of Central Asia to the deserts of Egypt. Kings grovel at your feet, generals tremble at your name, entire nations exist only because you allow them to. You should be satisfied, you should be content. After all, what more could a man possibly want? But here's the thing about power, it's like a drug, and you, my friend, are the ultimate addict. There's always one more hit to chase, one more conquest to achieve, one more people to crush under your golden sandals. And this morning, as you stretch in your silk sheets and contemplate the vast expanse of your domain, your eyes fall on the one corner of the map that still bears the humiliating label, unconquered. Beyond the Arixes River, in the trackless wastes of the Central Asian steppes, live a people called the Massagetes, nomads, horse riders, people who live in wagons and drink mare's milk and have never built a city in their lives. To most civilized men, they're barely worth noticing, barbarians living on the edge of the world, irrelevant to the great game of empire and politics. But you see an unfinished symphony, an incomplete masterpiece, a stain on your perfect record of conquest. You have no idea that these irrelevant barbarians are about to give you a lesson in humility that will echo through history. You have no idea that their queen, a woman, which makes it even more insulting, is about to turn your head into a wine cup, and your empire into a cautionary tale. You have no idea that today marks the beginning of the end of everything you've built. Let's start from the beginning, shall we? Because the story of how the world's greatest conqueror became a barbarian queen's trophy is also the story of how power corrupts, how hubris destroys, and how sometimes the universe has a sick sense of humor about teaching lessons to people who think they're gods. 60 years earlier, you weren't Cyrus the Great. You weren't even Cyrus the Mediocre. You were just a scared little boy hiding in the mountains, raised by shepherds, supposedly dead, and definitely not destined for greatness, according to everyone who knew about you. Your grandfather, Astyages, had been king of the Medes, the dominant power in the region before you came along, and ruined everyone's day. Like most kings, Astyages was paranoid about threats to his power, especially threats that came from his own family. So when his court magicians interpreted a dream to mean that his daughter's son would one day overthrow him, Astyages did what any reasonable tyrant would do. He ordered the baby killed. That baby was you. The job was given to Harpagus, a court official, who was supposed to take you up into the mountains and leave you for the wolves. Simple, efficient, no loose ends. Except Harpagus had a conscience, or maybe he was just squeamish about baby murder. Instead of killing you himself, he passed the job to a shepherd named Mithridates. But here's where the story gets interesting, because Mithridates' wife had just given birth to a stillborn child. When she saw you, healthy, beautiful, obviously royal, she made a deal with her husband. They would expose their own dead baby and raise you as their son. Astyages would get his corpse, they would get a living child, and you would get to grow up thinking you were a shepherd's boy. It was the kind of baby-switching plot that makes for great drama and terrible life choices. For 10 years you lived as a peasant, You herded goats, learned to fight with sticks, played war games with the village children, and had absolutely no idea that you were heir to a throne. You probably thought your biggest problem was whether there would be enough grain to last the winter. Then one day, during a children's game where you were chosen as the make-believe king, you ordered one of your playmates, the son of a nobleman, to do something he didn't want to do. When he refused, you had him beaten. The boy ran home crying to his father, who was outraged that his precious son had been disciplined by a mere shepherd's child. The nobleman complained to Astyages, who summoned you and the shepherd to court to sort out this minor dispute about children's games. It should have been nothing, a quick scolding, maybe a small fine, everyone goes home. Instead, Astyages took one look at you, and saw his own face staring back. The resemblance was unmistakable. The bearing, the intelligence, the way you spoke without fear to the king himself, everything screamed royal blood. Astyages questioned the shepherd, who broke down and confessed everything. The baby he'd been ordered to kill was alive, healthy, and standing right there in the throne room. Most kings would have finished the job right then and there. A quick execution, problem solved. But Astyages was curious. His court magicians assured him that since you had already ruled in the children's game, the prophecy was technically fulfilled. You were no longer a threat. They were wrong. Spectacularly, catastrophically wrong. Astyages sent you to Persia to live with your real parents, Cambyses and Mandane. He probably thought he was being merciful. What he was actually doing was giving his greatest enemy a 20-year head start. You grew up learning that you were royal, that you had been marked for death, that the gods had protected you for some great purpose. You studied warfare, politics, diplomacy, and the delicate art of making people want to follow you into hell. Most importantly, you learned to hate the Median Empire that had tried to murder you as a baby. By the time you were 30, you were ready to collect on that old debt. Your rise to power reads like a fever dream written by someone who doesn't believe in subtlety. First, you united the fractious Persian tribes under your banner, no mean feat, since Persians traditionally preferred fighting each other to fighting anyone else. You did this through a combination of charisma, strategic marriage alliances, and a carefully cultivated reputation for never breaking your word to allies and never showing mercy to enemies. Then, you turned your attention to the Medes. Your grandfather Astyages had grown old, paranoid, and unpopular. His people were tired of his random executions, arbitrary taxes, and general tyrannical behavior. When you marched into Media with your Persian army, half the Median nobles defected to your side before the first battle was even fought. The war was swift and brutal. Astyages, the man who had tried to have you killed as a baby, found himself dragged before your throne in chains. You could have executed him. You could have tortured him. You could have done any number of creative and terrible things to the grandfather who had ordered your death. Instead, you kept him as a prisoner at your court until he died of old age. Not out of mercy, mind you, but because living proof of your victory was more useful than a dead martyr. Every day that Astyages lived as your captive was a reminder to everyone else about what happened to people who opposed Cyrus the Great. With the Medes conquered, you controlled the largest empire in the known world. You could have stopped there. You should have stopped there. Most sensible people would have spent the next few decades consolidating power, improving administration, maybe building a few monuments to themselves. But you weren't most people. You were Cyrus the Great, and you had tasted blood. Next came Lydia, and its famously wealthy king, Croesus. This was the man who was supposedly richer than God, whose touch turned everything to gold, whose name had become synonymous with wealth itself. When you crushed his armies and burned his capital, you didn't just conquer a kingdom, you conquered the very concept of limitless riches. Croesus became your advisor, a former king reduced to giving tactical advice to his conqueror. The irony was delicious, and you savored every moment of it. After Lydia came the Greek cities of Asia Minor. These fell like dominoes, their walls crumbling before your siege engines, their rulers fleeing across the sea to beg for help from their mainland cousins. You weren't just conquering territory anymore, you were conquering the future. Every victory made the next one easier. Every fallen king made the remaining rulers more desperate to surrender without a fight. But your masterpiece, the conquest that made your name immortal, was Babylon. Babylon was supposed to be unconquerable. Its walls were so thick that 2 chariots could drive side by side along the top. Its defenders had never known defeat. Its gates were bronze, its towers reached toward heaven, and its king boasted that it would take the gods themselves to breach its defenses. You took it in a single night. The plan was audacious to the point of insanity. Instead of laying siege to the walls, you diverted the Euphrates River, which flowed directly through the city. Your engineers worked for weeks in secret, digging channels and building dams upstream from Babylon. Then, on a night when the Babylonians were celebrating a religious festival, you opened the floodgates. The river level dropped. What had been an impassable torrent became a shallow stream. Your soldiers waded along the riverbed, slipped under the water gates, and emerged inside the supposedly impregnable city, like ghosts materializing in a locked room. By dawn, Babylon belonged to you, the greatest city in the world, reduced to just another conquest in your ever-growing collection. The psychological impact was devastating. If Babylon could fall, anywhere could fall. Kings who had been considering resistance suddenly found reasons to submit. Generals who had been planning campaigns against you suddenly discovered urgent business elsewhere. The mere mention of your name became enough to end sieges and settle disputes. You were no longer just a conqueror, you were a force of nature, inevitable as earthquake or flood. The world had 2 choices: submit to Cyrus or be destroyed by him. For 29 years, that was how things worked. You pointed at a map, your armies marched, and another piece of the world became part of your empire. It was so easy that you probably started to believe your own propaganda about being chosen by the gods. That was your first mistake. Your second mistake was thinking that the pattern would continue forever. That somewhere out there, beyond the Araxes River, in the howling wilderness of the Central Asian steppes, there wasn't someone who had never heard of your reputation, and wouldn't have cared if they had. Someone who was about to teach you that some people cannot be conquered, some lands cannot be claimed, and some queens do not negotiate. The steppes beyond the Araxes River aren't like anything you've ever seen. They're not a place so much as a concept, an endless expanse of grass and sky that stretches beyond the horizon, beyond comprehension, beyond the edge of what civilized people consider possible. There are no cities here, no roads, no monuments, no permanent settlements of any kind. Just grass as far as the eye can see, rolling in waves under a sky so vast that it makes you feel like an insect. In summer, the sun beats down mercilessly, turning the landscape into a furnace where the unwary die of thirst and exposure. In winter, the winds howl across the flatlands with a cold that can freeze a man solid in minutes. This is where the Massagetti live. Not just survive, live, thrive, even flourish in their own nomadic way. They're not farmers or city builders. They're herders, following vast flocks of sheep, goats and horses across the grasslands in an endless migration that follows the seasons, the weather, and the availability of pasture. Their houses are wagons covered with felt, their roads are whatever direction the animals need to go, and their wealth is measured not in gold or silver, but in horses. Everything about their culture is built around movement, around the understanding that permanence is an illusion, and that the only real security comes from being able to pack up your entire life and disappear over the horizon at a moment's notice. Their children learn to ride before they can walk. By age 5 they can stay in the saddle at full gallop. By 10 they can shoot arrows while riding, hitting targets that would challenge a stationary archer. By 15 they're full warriors, capable of covering 100 miles in a day and fighting battles that begin and end with the speed of thought. They don't mine metals or work forges like civilized people. Instead, they trade with settled peoples for bronze and iron, or they take what they need from conquered enemies. Their weapons are bows and arrows, spears and battle axes, all designed to be used from horseback. They wear leather armor reinforced with bronze plates, and they fight in swarms, appearing suddenly like a thunderstorm and disappearing just as quickly. But perhaps the most important thing about the Massagetti is something that no city dweller, no matter how intelligent, can truly understand. They are absolutely completely free. They owe allegiance to no king except their own. They pay taxes to no empire. They follow no laws except those they make for themselves. When they move, it's because they choose to move. When they fight, it's because they choose to fight. When they die, it's on their own terms, in their own way, according to their own customs. This freedom isn't just political, it's existential. The Massagetti don't just live differently from civilized people, they think differently. The entire concept of empire, of one person ruling millions of others, is alien to them. They can't even comprehend why anyone would want to own land, build walls, or stay in one place for more than a season. Which makes them, from your perspective, the most dangerous enemy you've ever faced. Because how do you conquer people who have nothing you can take? How do you threaten people who are already living on the edge of survival? How do you rule people who would rather die than submit? You're about to find out. At the head of this nomadic nation stands a woman who embodies everything that should terrify a traditional king like you. Her name is Tomiris, and she's been ruling the Massagetti for over a decade through a combination of political cunning, military skill, and sheer force of personality. In your empire, women are property. They're traded like livestock to seal alliances, hidden away in harems, or married off to advance their family's political ambitions. The idea of a woman actually ruling, making military decisions, leading warriors into battle, it's not just foreign to you, it's almost incomprehensible. But Tomiris didn't become queen by inheritance or marriage. She earned her position the hard way, by proving again and again that she was the most capable leader the Massagetti had. In a society where weakness means death and leadership is earned through demonstrated competence, she rose to the top because she was simply better at the job than anyone else. She's not some pampered princess playing at power. She's a veteran warrior who has spent decades in the saddle, leading raids against the Massagetti's enemies, negotiating with neighboring tribes, and making the kind of life or death decisions that forge leaders in the crucible of constant struggle. Her people follow her not because they have to, but because they want to. Because she's proven over and over that her judgment is sound, her courage is unquestionable, and her commitment to their welfare is absolute. In a culture where loyalty must be earned anew each day, she has earned it through blood, sweat, and an unshakable dedication to her people's freedom. She's also a mother. Her son, Spargapices, is not just the heir to her position, but her pride and joy. The child she's raised to embody all the best qualities of the Massagetti: bravery, honor, independence, and an absolute refusal to bow to anyone. This is important, because when you threaten her people, you're not just threatening subjects or citizens, you're threatening her family. And when you eventually capture her son through treachery, you're not just taking a political hostage. You're making an enemy of a woman who has spent her entire life learning how to destroy anyone who threatens what she loves. Your first approach to the Massagetti problem is typically Cyrus. Why fight when you can negotiate? Why waste blood and treasure conquering people when you can simply absorb them through diplomacy? It's worked before with other kingdoms, and there's no reason to think it won't work now. So you send ambassadors across the Araxes River with an offer that seems, from your perspective, incredibly generous. You want to marry Tomiris, not just as a political alliance, but as a genuine partnership. She can keep ruling the Massagetti, you'll rule the Persian Empire, and together you can control the largest domain in human history. It's a smart offer, politically speaking. It would give you access to the Massagetti's horses and warriors without the cost of conquest. It would secure your eastern frontier without bloodshed. It would add another trophy to your collection of defeated kings, or in this case, queens. From Tomiris's perspective, however, your proposal isn't generous. It's insulting. She sees right through your diplomatic language to the reality underneath. This isn't about marriage or partnership. This is about conquest with a wedding dress thrown over it. You're not offering to share power with her. You're offering to let her keep the illusion of authority while you control everything that matters. More fundamentally, you're asking her to give up the one thing that defines the Massagetti, their independence. To accept your proposal would be to accept that they are just another piece on your strategic chessboard, just another people to be managed and controlled and absorbed into your ever-growing empire. Her rejection is swift and brutal. I know you're not courting me, you're courting my kingdom. Rule your own people, and let me rule mine. It's not just a diplomatic rebuff, it's a declaration of principles. She's telling you, in the clearest possible terms, that the Massagete will never be anyone's subjects, never bow to anyone's authority, never trade their freedom for security, or comfort, or even survival. You could have accepted this rejection gracefully. You could have found some other way to secure your eastern frontier. You could have recognized that some people simply cannot be conquered, and left the Massagete to their endless wandering across the steppes. Instead, you do what conquerors always do when diplomacy fails. You prepare for war. Your engineers are the best in the world, veterans of a dozen campaigns, who have bridged every river from the Indus to the Danube. The Araxes presents challenges, but nothing they haven't seen before. The current is swift, the waters are deep, but Persian engineering has conquered worse obstacles. They begin construction of a bridge that is itself a marvel of military technology. Massive wooden pillars driven deep into the riverbed, connected by spans strong enough to support not just your army, but your siege engines, supply wagons, and the vast logistical apparatus that moves with a Persian invasion force. But bridges aren't enough for an amphibious assault. Your shipwrights are also busy, constructing a fleet of transport vessels and floating towers that can carry your army across the water, even if the bridge is destroyed. These aren't simple rafts or fishing boats. They're purpose-built military vessels, bristling with armor and weaponry, designed to establish a beachhead on hostile shores. The message you're sending is clear. Ready or not, the Persian Empire is coming. You have the resources, the technology, and the manpower to cross any river, climb any mountain, and breach any defense. The Massagete can submit now or be crushed later, but either way, they will become part of your empire. Tomyris watches these preparations with interest rather than alarm. From her perspective, your engineering marvels aren't a sign of strength, they're a sign of weakness. Only people who don't belong in the steppes need such elaborate equipment just to cross a river. Her people could ford the Araxes with nothing but their horses and their courage. More importantly, your preparations are taking time. Weeks pass while your engineers work, and every day gives her more opportunities to scout your forces, understand your capabilities, and prepare her own response. When that response comes, it's not what you expect. Instead of fleeing deeper into the steppes or preparing for a siege, Tomyris sends you another message, and this one has the kind of queenly confidence that should have been a warning. King of the Medes. Again, she doesn't even acknowledge your proper title. Stop working yourself into a frenzy over this enterprise. After all, how can you possibly know whether its consequences will work out in your favor? Put a stop to it, rule your own subjects, and learn to live with the sight of me ruling mine. But no, peace is the last thing you want, and so you are bound not to follow my advice. Very well then, if you are really so desperate to pit your strength against that of the Massagete, then give up on your exhausting project of bridging the river, and we will withdraw 3 days' march from the river, so that you can then make the crossing into our territory. Alternatively, if you would rather receive us into your own lands, then you withdraw the same distance. It's not just a challenge, it's a masterpiece of psychological warfare. She's essentially saying, I'm so confident I can beat you that I'll let you choose the battlefield. Fight me on your territory or mine, it doesn't matter. The result will be the same. For a man who has spent his career intimidating enemies into submission, this level of casual confidence is infuriating. She's not treating you like the great king of Persia, conqueror of nations, builder of the largest empire in history. She's treating you like just another troublesome neighbor who needs to be taught some manners. Your war council convenes to discuss the options, and the consensus is unanimous. Let her come to you, fight on Persian soil, where you have supply lines, fortified positions, and the advantage of familiar terrain. It's the smart choice, the safe choice, the choice any competent general would make. But then Croesus opens his mouth. Remember Croesus, the former king of Lydia, the man whose legendary wealth couldn't save him from your conquest, the living example of what happens when hubris meets reality. This guy thinks he has advice for you, and unfortunately, you're going to listen to him. Croesus has been your advisor for years now, and his counsel has generally been sound. He knows the minds of kings, understands the delicate balance of diplomacy and force that keeps empires stable, and has experience with the kind of strategic thinking that wins wars and secures borders. But Croesus also has something else, a burning need to prove that his own defeat was a fluke, that he's still relevant, that he can contribute to your success in a way that validates his own failed reign. My lord, he says in that smooth voice that has already doomed one empire, consider this carefully. If you fight her on your own territory and lose, you lose everything. Your capital, your treasury, your throne, all gone in a single battle. But if you cross the river and fight her there, even if you lose, you can retreat back across the water and regroup. It sounds reasonable on the surface. After all, keeping your options open is usually good strategy, but Croesus isn't finished. Besides, he continues, I know how to beat these people. They're nomads, aren't they? They've never seen real luxury, never tasted civilized pleasures. They live on mare's milk and dried meat, wear leather clothes, sleep on the ground. They have no experience with the kind of wealth and refinement that we take for granted. Here's what we do. We cross into their territory and set up a feast. Not just any feast. A banquet that would make Babylonian nobles weep with envy. Roasted oxen, every delicacy in the Persian cookbook, and most importantly, amphora after amphora of pure, undiluted wine. The kind of wine that could knock a Persian veteran unconscious, let alone nomads who've probably never tasted anything stronger than fermented mare's milk. Then we withdraw most of our forces and wait. When the Massagetae stumble across this miraculous spread and inevitably gorge themselves into unconsciousness, we sweep in with our remaining troops and slaughter them in their sleep. It's perfect. We eliminate a significant portion of their forces without losing a single man. The plan is brilliant in its simplicity and devastating in its cynicism. It exploits the Massagetae's inexperience with Persian luxury, uses their own curiosity against them, and turns their victory into a trap. It's exactly the kind of asymmetric thinking that has won you an empire. It's also dishonorable, treacherous, and guaranteed to enrage any survivors beyond all possibility of negotiation or mercy. But you're not thinking about survivors. You're thinking about how elegant the plan is, how it will allow you to defeat the Massagetae without the cost and risk of a conventional battle. You're thinking about how history will remember the king who conquered the unconquerable steppes through superior intellect rather than brute force. You're not thinking about what happens when you humiliate a proud people through trickery. You're not thinking about what a mother will do when her son is captured through treachery rather than honest defeat. You're not thinking about the fact that some insults can only be answered with blood. That's going to be a problem. Your decision to accept Croesus's plan sets a chain of events in motion that will end with your head in a wineskin full of blood. But right now, as you watch your army cross the Araxes River like a steel flood, you're feeling confident, even exhilarated. This is what you do. This is what you're good at. For nearly 3 decades, you've been crossing rivers, invading countries, and adding new territories to your empire. The routine is familiar. March, fight, conquer, repeat. The Massagetae might be different from your previous enemies, but the fundamentals remain the same. Your army is a thing of beauty and terror. 20,000 of the finest soldiers in the world, veterans of campaigns from India to Egypt, equipped with the best weapons and armor that Persian forges can produce. They move with the precision of a machine, each unit knowing its role, each man confident in his training and his comrades. The engineers have done their work well. The bridges hold under the weight of your passage, the supply trains keep pace with the advance units, and within days you've established a substantial beachhead on the eastern side of the Araxes. From a purely military perspective, the invasion is proceeding flawlessly. Tomyris keeps her word. As your scouts report, the Massagetae have indeed withdrawn 3 days' march into the steppes, leaving you room to deploy your forces without immediate interference. It's almost disappointingly easy. You'd expected more resistance, more of the fierce defiance that the nomads are supposed to be famous for. What you don't realize is that withdrawal isn't retreat. The Massagetae aren't running away. they're giving you room to make a mistake. They're letting you advance into terrain that favors their style of warfare, while stretching your supply lines and separating you from your base of operations. In the vast emptiness of the steppes, your engineering marvels and logistical superiority mean less than they do in civilized warfare. Out here, mobility is everything, and the side that can move fastest and strike hardest will win regardless of numbers or equipment. But you're thinking like a Persian, not like a nomad. You see the successful river crossing, and the unopposed advance as signs of strength. You interpret Tomyris's withdrawal as evidence that she's already intimidated by your reputation. You're setting up your trap with meticulous care. The feast that Croesus designed is a masterpiece of temptation. Roasted oxen, exotic delicacies, fruits and sweets that most of your own soldiers have never tasted, and amphora after amphora of the finest wine in your treasury. It's arranged in a seemingly abandoned camp, complete with scattered weapons and equipment, to suggest that your forces fled in panic. Then you withdraw the bulk of your army to concealment and wait for the Massagetae to take the bait. It works perfectly. A third of their forces discovers your abandoned camp and falls upon the feast like starving wolves. These are warriors who have lived their entire lives on a subsistence diet, who consider fresh meat a luxury and have never imagined that food could be prepared with such sophistication. The wine is even more devastating than you hoped. These people have no tolerance for alcohol, no experience with beverages stronger than fermented mare's milk. Within hours, the entire Massagetan force is sprawled around your campfires, unconscious, helpless, completely at your mercy. And mercy is not something you're planning to show. You signal the attack. Your soldiers emerge from concealment and fall upon the sleeping nomads like reapers harvesting grain. This isn't a battle, it's a slaughter. These aren't soldiers dying in honest combat. They're unconscious men being butchered like sheep. By dawn, the ground is soaked with blood and littered with corpses. You've eliminated a significant portion of the Massagetan military without losing a single man. Among the prisoners you take is someone very special. Spargapises, the son of Queen Tomyris and heir to the Massagetan throne. As your soldiers drag the boy before you, wine-sick, horrified, but trying to maintain some dignity despite his circumstances, you feel the familiar satisfaction of a perfectly executed plan. You have leverage now. You have a bargaining chip that will force Tomyris to negotiate on your terms. What you have, actually, is a death sentence. But you won't realize that until it's far too late. The news of the massacre reaches Tomyris like a lightning bolt, and her reaction transforms her from a political opponent into something far more dangerous. A mother who has lost her child to treachery. Her message, when it comes, arrives like a judgment from the gods themselves. Blood drinker, never sated. Are you proud of your work today? You shouldn't be. The fruit of the vine, that poison that bloats you Persians into madness, that makes wine slip down your throats while curses rise from your gullets, that was your weapon. You scorned honest battle, chose trickery over valor, and defeated my son with poison rather than steel. Now listen carefully, Cyrus, because I'm going to give you some advice, and I suggest you take it. Return my son, leave my country. Do this, and I'll overlook the brutal way you slaughtered a third of my army. I'll let this insult pass, though it goes against every instinct I have. Refuse, and I swear by the sun, Lord of the Massagetae, light of our people, witness to all oaths, that blood drinker though you are, ravening though your appetite may be, I will glut you with blood until you choke on it. It's not a threat, it's not even a promise. It's a prophecy, delivered with the cold certainty of someone who has already seen how this story ends. You dismiss it entirely. After all, what can one grieving mother do against the might of the Persian Empire? You have her son. You have the advantage of superior numbers and equipment, and you have the psychological edge of having already defeated part of her forces. What you fail to understand is that you've crossed a line. In nomadic culture, there are rules about warfare, codes of honor that even enemies are expected to observe. You don't poison your enemy's food. You don't use their hospitality against them. You don't turn a feast into a trap. By violating these unwritten laws, you've marked yourself as something worse than an enemy. You've become an abomination, a creature so foul that it cannot be allowed to exist. More personally, you've humiliated Tomyris in the worst possible way. You've proven that her son, her pride, her heir, the embodiment of everything she values about her people, can be captured not through skill or courage, but through trickery and poison. That's an insult that can only be answered with death. Your captive, Spargapizes, eventually sobers up from his wine-induced stupor. As the fog clears from his mind, he begins to understand the full horror of his situation. He's the heir to his people, the son of their queen, a prince born to lead warriors and defend the freedom of the steppes. And he's been captured not through honest defeat in battle, but through treachery, through poison, through the kind of dishonorable trap that makes songs of mourning instead of glory. For someone raised in Massagetan culture, where honor is more important than life itself, the shame is unbearable. He hasn't just been defeated, he's been made a fool of. Worse, his capture has given you leverage over his mother, forced her into a position where she might have to negotiate from weakness. The thought of his proud mother being forced to grovel before a foreign tyrant because of his failure is more than he can endure. He makes a simple request: remove his chains, just for a moment. Let him feel like a free man one last time, before you drag him back to Persia as a trophy. It's the kind of small mercy that civilized people show to defeated enemies, a final gesture of respect for a brave opponent. You grant it, why not? The boy is beaten, broken, a symbol of your victory over his proud people. What harm could there be in a moment's kindness to a defeated enemy? The instant the chains fall away, Spargapizes draws a hidden dagger and drives it into his own heart. He dies free. He dies unbroken. He dies on his own terms according to his own code, in defiance of everything you represent, and in dying, he sends a message that echoes across the steppes like thunder. The Massagetan would rather die than submit. You watch the life fade from his eyes and feel something you haven't experienced in years: genuine unease. This wasn't supposed to happen. Prisoners don't kill themselves. They beg for mercy, offer ransoms, or try to negotiate their way to freedom. They don't choose death over dishonor with such casual certainty. For the first time since this campaign began, you wonder if you might have misunderstood something fundamental about your enemies. That's when a messenger arrives with news that confirms your worst fears. Tomyris has received word of her son's death, and she's no longer interested in negotiation. She's coming for you, and she's bringing everyone. What approaches across the steppes isn't just an army, it's a migration of vengeance. Every warrior the Massagetan can field, every rider who can sit a horse, every veteran who has survived decades on the unforgiving grasslands. This isn't a military campaign, it's the entire nomadic nation moving as one vast organism with a single purpose: to make the Persian invaders pay in blood for what they've done. Your scouts bring back reports that should terrify any rational commander. Thousands upon thousands of riders, stretching from horizon to horizon like a sea of horsemen. They move faster than your army, know the terrain better than your guides, and fight with a fury that your disciplined soldiers have never encountered. But perhaps most unsettling of all is what your scouts tell you about Tomyris herself. She's not commanding from the rear like a civilized ruler. She's in the front rank, mounted on a black war horse, her weapon already bloody from cutting down Persian stragglers. She's not just leading this army, she's become its living embodiment, a force of nature given human form. You could retreat. Your bridges are still intact, your path back to Persia still open. Any reasonable commander would withdraw, regroup, perhaps try a different approach later. The smart play would be to fall back to fortified positions and let the nomads exhaust themselves against your defenses. But you're not any reasonable commander. You're Cyrus the Great, conqueror of nations, builder of empires, the man who has never retreated from anyone. You've spent 29 years building a reputation for invincibility, and you're not about to destroy it by running from a grieving woman and her army of barbarians. Besides, you tell yourself, you still have advantages. Your soldiers are better equipped, better trained, more disciplined. Your tactics are more sophisticated, your logistics more reliable. These are just nomads with bows and horses. Dangerous, certainly, but not unstoppable. You're about to learn the difference between conquering civilized enemies and fighting people who have nothing left to lose. The battle, when it finally comes, begins at dawn on a plain that will never be the same afterward. The morning mist rises from the grasslands, like the breath of sleeping giants, and through it you can see them, rank upon rank of Masagetan warriors, their weapons gleaming in the early light, their horses stamping and snorting in anticipation of combat. At their head rides Tomyris, and even from a distance, you can feel the weight of her hatred like a physical force. She's not just here to defeat you, she's here to erase you, to make sure that nothing remains of Cyrus the Great, except a cautionary tale told around nomad campfires. You form your battle lines with the precision that has won you an empire. Infantry in the center, cavalry on the flanks, archers positioned to provide covering fire. Your soldiers move with the mechanical efficiency of a well-oiled machine, each man knowing his role, each unit coordinated with military perfection. It's beautiful, in its way, the culmination of decades of military evolution, the finest expression of civilized warfare that the world has ever seen. Against any conventional enemy, it would be unstoppable. But the Massagetei aren't conventional enemies. The battle begins with arrows, thousands upon thousands of arrows, darkening the sky like a plague of bronze-tipped locusts. The Massagetei are master archers, born to the bow, able to shoot accurately while riding at full gallop. They don't just aim and fire, they dance with their weapons, weaving between your return volleys, while sending death streaming into your ranks. Your infantry, veterans of a dozen campaigns, huddle behind their shields as the bronze-tipped death rains down on them. They've faced arrow storms before, but nothing like this. The nomads don't just shoot, they sing while they do it, war songs that rise above the whistling of projectiles and the screams of wounded men. You return fire with everything you have. Persian archery is the finest in the civilized world, and when your bowmen loose their volleys, the sky becomes a cross-hatched maze of flying death. Men fall on both sides, pierced through armor, through flesh, through bone. The ground begins to grow slick with blood. But the Massagetei have something your soldiers don't. Absolute mobility. While your archers are stationary targets, bound to their positions by military discipline, the nomads flow across the battlefield like water, never staying in one place long enough to become vulnerable. Then the missiles run out, and the real killing begins. What follows isn't really a battle in any sense that you understand. It's something older, more primal, a return to the most basic form of human conflict, where survival depends not on training or equipment, but on pure animal ferocity. The two armies crash together like breaking waves. Persian spears meet Massagetei axes in a sound like the world cracking open. Swords clash against swords, shields splinter under the impact of war hammers, and men grapple in the mud, stabbing with daggers, biting, clawing, fighting with the desperate savagery of animals. For hours they fight. The sun climbs overhead, blazing down on a field that has become a charnel house. Neither side gives ground. Your Persians, disciplined and professional, meet their match in these nomad warriors who have spent their lives fighting for survival against everything from rival tribes to the steppes themselves. This is where all your advantages, superior equipment, better training, tactical discipline, begin to matter less and less. Because the Massagetei aren't fighting for conquest or glory or political advantage. They're fighting for something far more powerful, vengeance for a murdered prince and the honor of their people. And gradually, inevitably, that motivation begins to tell. You're in the thick of the fighting yourself, of course. You've never been the kind of king who commands from safety while others die for his ambitions. Your sword is bloody, your armor dented from a dozen impacts, your voice hoarse from shouting orders over the din of battle. But you can feel it happening, the subtle shift in momentum that every experienced warrior learns to recognize. Your lines are starting to bend, not breaking, not yet, but sagging under pressure that never seems to ease. Every Persian who falls is irreplaceable. Every Massagetei who dies is immediately replaced by two more. It's like fighting the tide, like trying to hold back the ocean with your bare hands. That's when you see her. Tomyris cuts through your soldiers like a scythe through wheat, her blade red with Persian blood, her horse trampling the fallen as she advances deeper into your ranks. She's not some pampered royal issuing commands from safety. She's a force of destruction, personally responsible for more Persian deaths than any three of her warriors combined. But it's not just her fighting skill that's devastating your army, it's what she represents. Your soldiers are professionals, fighting for pay and plunder and the glory of the Persian Empire. Her warriors are fighting for their queen, their people, their freedom, and the memory of a prince who chose death over dishonor. The psychological difference is impossible to overcome. Your eyes meet across the battlefield, and in that moment, you understand. This isn't just a military engagement, it's personal. She's not here to defeat the Persian army. She's here to kill you, specifically with her own hands. The realization should terrify you. Instead, it fills you with a strange kind of respect. Here, finally, is an enemy worthy of Cyrus the Great. An opponent who fights not from ambition or fear, but from something pure and terrible, and absolutely implacable. Too bad you're about to lose. The end, when it comes, is swift and brutal. Your army doesn't collapse all at once. That would be too clean, too simple. Instead, it dies the way empires die. Section by section, failure by failure, until the center can no longer hold. First, your left flank wavers under a concentrated Massagetan assault. The nomads have figured out that your cavalry, while well trained, can't match their mobility. They swarm around your horsemen like wasps, stinging and retreating, never letting the Persians close to effective range. Then your archers run out of arrows. You brought enough for a conventional battle, but this slaughter has consumed your supplies faster than anyone anticipated. Without covering fire, your infantry becomes vulnerable to the kind of close-quarters fighting where Massagetan ferocity gives them the advantage. Your reserves commit, trying to shore up the crumbling flanks, but they're met by a fresh wave of nomad warriors who seem to appear from nowhere. Where are they all coming from? How can these barbarians field so many fighters? The answer is simple. You're not fighting an army, you're fighting a people. Every man, woman and adolescent who can hold a weapon has come to avenge Spargapises. This isn't a military campaign, it's a holy war. Your center holds for a while longer. Your veteran troops fighting with the desperate courage of men who know they're doomed, but refuse to go quietly. They form squares, lock shields, and sell their lives as dearly as they can. For a moment, it looks like they might stabilize the situation. Then Tomyris herself charges into the center of your formation. She comes like thunder made flesh, her black horse scattering your soldiers like bowling pins, her weapon cutting down everyone within reach. But it's not random slaughter, she's carving a path directly toward you, ignoring easier targets, focused entirely on the golden armor that marks you as the Persian king. You raise your sword to meet her charge. For a heartbeat, the two of you are locked in single combat while chaos rages around you. The conqueror of nations against the queen of the steppes, empire against freedom, the old world against something wild and terrible and new. You're a skilled warrior. You fought in dozens of battles, killed enemies with your own hands, proven your courage in combat from India to Egypt. But Tomyris has spent her entire life fighting for survival in a world where weakness means death. She's not just skilled, she's desperate, furious, and absolutely committed to your destruction. The fight is brief. Her blade finds the gap in your armor, slides between the golden plates that have protected you through so many campaigns. You feel the steel part your flesh, feel your strength flowing out with your blood. As you fall from your horse to the blood-soaked earth, you have time for one last thought. This isn't how it was supposed to end. You were chosen by the gods, blessed by fortune, destined for greatness. You weren't supposed to die in some nameless field at the edge of the world, killed by a barbarian queen whose people you barely considered human. But destiny, it turns out, has a sense of irony. The last thing you see is Tomyris standing over your body, her weapon raised to deliver the final blow. The last thing you hear is her voice, cutting through the din of battle like a blade through silk. This is for my son. Then darkness takes you, and Cyrus the Great becomes just another corpse on a battlefield that will be forgotten by history. When the killing finally stops and the last Persian soldier has fallen or fled, Tomyris walks among the dead. The field is carpeted with bodies, her people and yours, mixed together in the democratic equality of death. The air reeks of blood and voided bowels and the sweet, cloying smell of mortality. She finds your body where it fell, still wearing the golden armor that marked you as special, still clutching the sword that has cut down lesser kings. Even in death, you look like what you were, the most powerful man in the world, brought low by hubris and bad choices. But Tomyris isn't interested in your majesty or your reputation. She's interested in justice. She orders her warriors to bring her a wineskin, not just any wineskin, but one made specifically for this moment. She fills it with human blood, dark and red and still warm from the battlefield, the blood of Persians mainly, though some of it belongs to her own people. It doesn't matter. In death, all blood looks the same. Then she lifts your severed head and pushes it deep into the gore. "I am alive and victorious," she says to your lifeless face, her voice carrying across the silent battlefield. "But you have destroyed me by taking my son through treachery. As I promised, I now give you your fill of blood. It's not just revenge, it's poetry. The blood drinker, finally drinking his fill. The conqueror, conquered. The man who took everything, losing everything in return." Your head disappears into the crimson darkness, and with it, the myth of Persian invincibility dies. The empire you built will survive for another 2 centuries, but it will never again seem quite as permanent, quite as inevitable as it did when you ruled it. The news travels fast, as bad news always does. Across the breadth of your empire, from the Hindu Kush to the shores of the Aegean, the whispered reports spread like wildfire. Cyrus is dead. The great king has fallen. The man who seemed invincible, unstoppable, chosen by the gods themselves, lies headless in a barbarian's wineskin. Your son Cambyses inherits the throne, but he's not you. He lacks your charisma, your strategic genius, your ability to inspire loyalty in both subjects and enemies. Under his rule, the empire begins to show cracks. Rebellions in Egypt, unrest in Babylon, the slow erosion of the fear that held your conquests together. More importantly, Tomyris has taught the world something that changes everything. There are still people who cannot be conquered, lands that cannot be claimed, spirits that cannot be broken. Power has limits, empire has borders, and even the greatest king in history is still just a man. The psychological impact is devastating. If Cyrus the Great can fall, anyone can fall. If the Persian Empire can be defied, any empire can be defied. The spell of inevitability that made your conquests possible has been broken by a nomad queen with a dead son and a wineskin full of blood. Over the following decades, other rulers will test Persian strength and find it wanting. Alexander of Macedon will eventually conquer the entire empire, and he'll do it partly because Tomyris proved that Persians could be beaten. The Roman Republic will expand eastward, confident that even great empires can be destroyed by those with sufficient will and courage. But more immediately, the Massageti become legend. Stories of the queen who humbled an emperor spread across the known world, told around campfires and in royal courts, sung by bards and recounted by historians. They become a symbol of resistance, proof that freedom can triumph over tyranny if the price is worth paying. Your story becomes a cautionary tale, the kind of tragedy that makes philosophers stroke their beards and rulers lie awake at night, wondering if they're next. It has all the elements of classic hubris: the mighty king, the seemingly impossible quest, the trusted advisor giving terrible counsel, the enemy underestimated until too late. But beneath the surface morality play lies something more complex and troubling, because the truth is, you weren't a monster, you weren't some cartoon villain twirling his mustache while oppressing the innocent. By the standards of your time, you were actually a remarkably enlightened ruler. You freed the Jewish exiles from Babylon, allowing them to return to their homeland and rebuild their temple. You respected local customs and religions throughout your empire, ruling through existing structures rather than imposing Persian culture by force. You were known for keeping your word, showing mercy to defeated enemies, and governing with a relatively light hand. In many ways, you were exactly the kind of ruler that conquered peoples hoped for: competent, tolerant, and more interested in stability than exploitation. But none of that mattered when you came up against people who valued freedom more than prosperity, independence more than security, honor more than life itself. The Massagetae didn't want enlightened rule or benevolent tyranny. They wanted to be left alone, to live according to their own customs in their own lands. And when you couldn't accept that simple desire, when your ambition demanded that every corner of the world bow to Persian authority, you triggered a conflict that could only end one way: with your head in a barbarian's wineskin. The lesson isn't just about the dangers of hubris or the limits of military power. It's about the fundamental incompatibility between empire and freedom, between the desire to rule and the refusal to be ruled. Some conflicts can't be resolved through negotiation or compromise. Some peoples would rather die than submit. Some queens will burn the world down to avenge their children. You learned all of this too late to save yourself, but your death became a teaching moment for every ruler who came after. The story of Cyrus and Tomyris entered the permanent record of human civilization as a reminder that power, no matter how great, is always temporary, and that the mightiest empire can be brought low by a single person who refuses to kneel. Centuries pass. The Persian Empire falls to Alexander, who falls to time and his own ambitions. The Romans rise and conquer most of the known world, only to fragment and collapse in turn. Empires rise and fall like waves on a beach, each one convinced of its own permanence, each one eventually reduced to archaeological curiosities and footnotes in history books. But the story of Cyrus and Tomyris endures. It's retold by Herodotus, the father of history, who recognizes it as one of the great tales of human ambition and consequence. It's referenced by later historians, quoted by philosophers, adapted by poets and playwrights. The image of your severed head in the queen's wineskin becomes iconic, a symbol of pride punished, of empire humbled, of the revenge that awaits those who mistake power for righteousness. Artists paint it, sculptors carve it, writers use it as a metaphor for the inevitable fall of tyrants. More importantly, it becomes part of the cultural DNA of resistance movements. Whenever people find themselves facing impossible odds against overwhelming power, they remember Tomyris. They remember that one determined person can change the course of history, that the mightiest oppressor can be brought low, that freedom is always worth fighting for even when victory seems impossible. The Massagetae themselves fade from history, their nomadic lifestyle leaving few archaeological traces, but their example lives on in every uprising, every rebellion, every moment when ordinary people decide they'd rather die on their feet than live on their knees. Your empire, which seemed so permanent and inevitable, becomes just another chapter in the long story of human ambition and folly. But Tomyris becomes eternal. In the end, that's perhaps the greatest irony of all. You set out to achieve immortality through conquest, to build an empire so vast and magnificent that your name would echo through the ages, and you succeeded in a way. Cyrus the Great is indeed remembered as one of history's greatest rulers, a visionary leader who built the foundation for centuries of Persian power. But Tomyris achieved something greater. She became a symbol, an archetype, a story that people tell when they need to believe that resistance is possible. She's the answer to every tyrant's claim that opposition is futile. Proof that power, no matter how vast, can be challenged and defeated. She never built monuments to herself. She never commissioned historians to record her deeds. She never created an empire or conquered foreign lands. But she did something more lasting. She stood up to the most powerful man in the world and won. And in winning, she guaranteed that her story would outlive every empire, outlast every conqueror, and inspire every generation that faces the choice between submission and resistance. The steps where you died are empty now, reclaimed by grass and wind and the eternal silence of the vast spaces. But somewhere in that emptiness, your ghost wanders still, searching for the head that Tomyris took, trying to understand how the master of the world became a cautionary tale. The wineskin rotted away long ago, its contents dried to dust, but the lesson it taught remains fresh, that some people cannot be conquered, some spirits cannot be broken, and some queens will make the gods themselves weep for the price of their vengeance. Sweet dreams, Cyrus. The steppes remember everything, and they're still free. Today, when tourists visit the ruins of Persepolis, they walk among the shattered columns and broken reliefs of what was once the ceremonial capital of your empire. They see the remains of palaces that housed the wealth of nations, throne rooms where kings from India to Ethiopia came to pay tribute, gardens where the most powerful man in the world once walked in confident certainty of his own greatness. The tour guides tell them about your victories, your conquests, your role in shaping the ancient world. They explain how the Persian Empire was the largest the world had ever seen, how it connected East and West for the first time, how it laid the groundwork for every empire that followed. But they rarely mention the steppes beyond the Araxes River. They don't talk about the nomad queen who proved that some people can't be bought, can't be intimidated, can't be conquered. They don't explain that the greatest empire in history met its match in a grieving mother with nothing left to lose. Because that's not the story empires like to tell about themselves. That's not the narrative that power once preserved. But it's the story that matters most. It's the reminder that no matter how vast your armies, how sophisticated your technology, how brilliant your strategies, there will always be someone willing to stand against you. There will always be people who value freedom more than security, honor more than life, justice more than peace. There will always be another Tormyrus, waiting beyond the horizon with a wineskin and a dream of vengeance. The blood drinker learned this lesson too late to save himself. But his death ensures that every would-be conqueror who comes after will have to face the same fundamental question: is your empire worth dying for? Because somewhere in the vast spaces beyond your borders, someone is asking themselves if their freedom is worth killing for. And if history has taught us anything, it's that the second question always wins.